The gasp cut through the music like a blade. Not a gasp of delight, something worse. The kind that rips from your throat when your mind can't process what your eyes are seeing. Lady Celeste Ashford set her wine goblet down, slowly. Across the grand hall of Thornwood Palace, the most exclusive venue in the Northern Kingdoms, the kind of place where a single invitation could change your family's fortunes forever, every conversation had stopped. Every head turned toward the entrance, and Celeste understood why. Mira Blackwell was standing at the top of the curved stone staircase. Mira, who scrubbed Celeste's floors, who washed Celeste's linens, who had spent the last 7 months on her knees polishing silver in Celeste's kitchens for 3 copper pennies a day. That Mira, standing in a gown that made every woman in the hall look like they'd dressed in servants' cast-offs. Midnight blue silk, not navy, midnight. The kind of color that exists only in certain light, shifting like deep water under stars. Thousands of hand-stitched silver threads ran from the neckline down to the hem in cascading patterns that looked like constellations. The cut was architectural, precise. The kind of precision that doesn't come from a village seamstress. "Is that—" someone behind Celeste breathed, then stopped. "That's a Ravencrest original," a nobleman said, his voice breaking. "I attended the Royal Summit in Silverhaven. That gown, that's the gown Queen Morgana wore for her coronation portrait. That gown isn't for sale. The Ravencrest family keeps all royal commission pieces in their private collection." Celeste felt the floor tilt beneath her slippers. No, this wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. 3 days earlier, Celeste had been standing in her dressing chamber with 2 of her closest friends, Lady Vivian Ashton and Lady Seraphina Grey, watching Mira fold linens in the adjoining room. "I have an idea," Celeste had said, voice loud enough to carry. She'd walked to the doorway. "Mira." A pause to make sure Vivian and Seraphina were positioned behind her, watching. "I'm hosting a table at the Winter Gala on Saturday, the royal event. You've probably seen the invitations on my writing desk." Mira had looked up, brown eyes steady. She never reacted too much, which Celeste had always found irritating. "Invitations are 200 gold sovereigns each," Celeste continued. "I've decided to give you one." Silence stretched. "It's exclusive. Every noble family who matters in this kingdom will be there. I thought you deserved a night out." She'd let the smile sit long enough to sting. "Wear whatever you have. I'm sure you'll find something appropriate." She turned back to her friends. They'd made it to the hallway before the laughter started. Quiet. Vicious. A sound Celeste would later wish she could take back. "Did you see her face? She's going to show up in something from the village market. The whole court is going to know she's a servant." Behind the half-closed door, Mira had stood very still folding the linens, her hands moving on habit while her mind moved somewhere else entirely. She'd let the laughing voices fade down the corridor. Then she'd set down the linens, walked to her small bag, pulled out a communication crystal she hadn't activated in 6 months, pressed her thumb to it. "Mother," she said when the glow connected, "I need the midnight gown." Here's what Lady Celeste Ashford didn't know about the woman scrubbing her floors. Mira Blackwell's mother was Alara Ravencrest. If you didn't recognize that name, you weren't in high society. Alara had built one of the most respected design houses in the realm from a single workshop in the capital city. By the time Mira was 12, Ravencrest gowns were worn at royal coronations and noble weddings across 3 kingdoms. By the time Mira was 16, museums were requesting pieces for permanent exhibitions. By 20, Alara's work had been commissioned by every major royal house on the continent. Mira had grown up inside that empire. Private tutors, estates in the capital, and summer homes by the coast. Front row seats at every royal event. A name that opened doors so fast she'd never once had to knock. And that was the problem. At 24, Mira had realized she didn't know who she was without the name. Every friendship, every opportunity, every room she'd ever walked into, it had all come through the door of being Alara's daughter. She couldn't separate herself from the inheritance. Couldn't know if anything she'd built was actually hers. So she'd made a deal with her mother. 1 year, completely anonymous. No access to family accounts. No using the Ravencrest name. A real position in a real household, starting from nothing. To find out who Mira was when the name was stripped away. Her mother had cried, then agreed. One condition. If Mira ever truly needed her, she would be there within 1 day. Mira had chosen Thornwood Province, found a servants' placement agency, moved into a small room above a bakery with second-hand furniture and a mattress that was too soft. She'd learned what tired felt like in your bones. She'd learned what it meant to be invisible, to stand in a room and have people look past you, through you, around you. People like Celeste Ashford, who spoke to her the way you speak to furniture. She'd planned to finish the year. Then Celeste had stood in that doorway with that smile, and everything had changed. Mira stared at the crystal after the connection ended. She'd given 7 months to this experiment. She'd proven what she needed to prove. Time to remember who she was. The package arrived 18 hours later, not by merchant cart, by a private carriage with the Ravencrest crest on the door, followed by 4 riders, her mother's head designer, 2 assistants, a styling specialist, all of them carrying sealed cases. "Your mother sends her love," the designer said, unlatching the main garment case, "and her masterwork." The midnight gown came out like a living thing. It shifted in the lamplight, the silver threads catching and scattering every photon in the room. Mira had seen it once before, at Queen Morgana's coronation, as the centerpiece of her mother's most acclaimed royal commission. Court historians had called it wearable starlight. A museum in the Western Kingdoms had offered to purchase it. Her mother had declined. And now it was here, in a room above a bakery, because Celeste Ashford had wanted to see a servant embarrass herself. There was a note in the garment case, handwritten in her mother's elegant script. "You were never invisible. You were just choosing to be quiet. Come home when you're ready." Mother Mira folded the note carefully and put it in her pocket. Then she sat down in the chair they'd positioned by the window and let them get to work. 5 hours later, she looked in the mirror. The woman looking back didn't look like a servant, didn't look like Alara's daughter playing dress-up. She looked like herself. Finally, fully herself. She picked up her cloak and walked out. Back in the grand hall, Mira descended the stone staircase. The crowd parted, not on purpose, not with any intention. The way crowds part when something moves through them that they don't quite know how to stand next to. Whispers erupted. Someone near the wine tables actually dropped their goblet. Celeste was frozen. Vivian had reached out and grabbed her wrist without realizing it. Mira crossed the marble floor like she'd been crossing palace floors her whole life, which she had. She moved through the parted crowd with no urgency, no performance, no anger on her face. Just a calm so complete it was almost unsettling. She stopped in front of Celeste. "Lady Ashford." Her voice was warm. "Thank you so much for the invitation. This was incredibly generous of you." Celeste's mouth moved. No sound. "You told me to wear whatever I had." Mira touched the gown once, lightly, at the waist. "I hope this is appropriate." Somewhere behind Celeste, a man laughed. One sharp burst of startled sound quickly swallowed. Vivian had let go of Celeste's wrist. Her voice was barely a breath. "Where did you? How did you? That gown." "I know that gown," Seraphina interrupted, her face pale. "That's from Queen Morgana's coronation. That's a Ravencrest commission piece." "My mother made it," Mira said simply. The words dropped into a silence so complete that half the hall heard them. Vivian's voice cracked. "Your mother is Alara Ravencrest?" Mira tilted her head slightly. "Alara Ravencrest of House Blackwell. Perhaps you've heard of her." Then the room erupted. Not all at once, in waves. A gasp, then a ripple, then the full roar of 200 nobles simultaneously processing the same impossible information. Celeste stood at the center of it like a woman in the eye of a storm. And unlike storms, this one wasn't moving around her. This one was looking directly at her. Celeste found out what it felt like to become invisible inside of 20 minutes. The conversations that stopped when she approached. The eyes that slid away. Vivian had walked off without explanation. Serafina was on the far side of the hall, having what looked like an animated, horrified conversation with someone Celeste didn't recognize. Meanwhile, Mira was surrounded. Fashion merchants, representatives from noble houses, the royal event coordinator, the palace steward. All of them leaning in, asking questions, touching the gown's silver threads reverently. Mira answered each one like she had all the time in the world. Celeste's husband found her against the far wall. Lord Damien Ashford was not a man who raised his voice. He didn't need to. 38 years old, inherited his family's trading empire, and doubled it in 10 years. The kind of man who communicated everything essential without changing his expression. He leaned in close. "Tell me what happened," he said quietly. "I didn't know who she was." "You invited our servant to a royal gala as what? A social joke? And she turns out to be Alara Ravencrest's daughter." He paused. "That's not a sentence I expected to say tonight. I didn't know. You were cruel to her for 7 months without knowing." His voice didn't change. "What exactly did you think you were doing?" Celeste said nothing. "The Ravencrest family has business relationships with every major royal house on the continent. Alara Ravencrest personally sits on 3 royal advisory councils that our family has been trying to gain access to for 2 years. Damien's jaw was tight. "Do you understand what you've done?" Celeste's throat closed. "Fix it," Damien said. "Tonight. Or tomorrow you'll be fixing it without my name attached." He straightened his doublet, walked away, and Celeste stood there alone in the middle of the most exclusive event in the kingdom, for the first time in her adult life, understanding what it felt like to take up space in a room and wish you didn't. She waited until the crowd around Mira had thinned. Then she crossed the hall. She walked the same marble floor she'd walked 100 times at events like this, but it had never felt this long before. "Mira." She kept her voice steady by force of will. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Mira excused herself from the conversation she was having, gracefully without showing anything on her face. She followed Celeste to a quiet alcove near the gardens. Celeste had prepared words. They evaporated. "I'm sorry," she said instead. Just that. Raw and graceless and real. "What I did? The invitation? The way I said it? I was trying to humiliate you. I've treated you badly for 7 months. I'm sorry." The silence that followed was the longest of her life. "Why?" Mira said. "Why what?" "Why were you cruel to me?" Her voice carried no accusation. Genuine question. Celeste opened her mouth. The honest answer was embarrassing in its smallness. "Because I thought you couldn't do anything about it. Because you were safe to be cruel to." She didn't have to say it out loud. Mira watched her face and understood. "That's what I thought," Mira said quietly. "You weren't cruel to me because of anything I did. You were cruel because you assumed you could be. Because you thought I had no power." She paused. "That's the thing about people who only treat others well when there's something to gain. The moment the mask slips, everything's visible." Celeste couldn't meet her eyes. "I believe you're sorry," Mira said, and her voice, impossibly, was soft. "I forgive you, Celeste, but I need you to understand what tonight actually was. Not what happened to me, what it showed about you. That's the part you have to carry." She said it the way you tell someone a hard truth, not to punish them, but because leaving them in ignorance would be its own kind of cruelty. Celeste nodded, her eyes burned. Mira returned to the gala. Celeste stayed in the alcove for a long time. 2 days later, Mira was packing up her small room above the bakery. It was a small operation. She'd arrived with almost nothing and accumulated very little. 7 months of plain furniture, second-hand dishes, clothes that didn't match what she was used to. She'd been surprised over time by how much she didn't miss. The money, the name, the ease of every door opening. She hadn't missed any of it. She'd missed her mother's voice, the smell of the design workshop, the specific kind of joy that came from watching someone wear a gown that made them feel like themselves for the first time. A knock at the door. Celeste Ashford stood in the hallway. No elaborate gown, no styled hair. Just a woman in a simple traveling dress and cloak. Her face a little older looking than it had been 2 days ago, in the way that some kinds of honesty age you. "I know you're leaving," Celeste said. "I just wanted to say goodbye. Properly." Mira stepped back to let her in. Celeste stood in the middle of the small room and looked around at the second-hand furniture, the single candle on the windowsill, the neatly packed bags. "You really lived like this," she said, not with pity, something more like awe. "The whole time?" That was the point. "What did it teach you?" Celeste asked. And for the first time it wasn't a performance. It was a real question from someone who genuinely needed to know. Mira was quiet for a moment. "That dignity doesn't come from the outside. Everyone I know from my old life moves through the world assuming they deserve to take up space because they were told to, because the world confirms it. But that assumption gets tested when it's removed." She picked up a stack of books and placed them in a bag. "I learned that I still knew who I was without the name. That was the real question. That's what I came here to answer." Celeste sat down on the edge of the stripped bed. "I've been doing things differently this week," she said quietly. "Small things. Noticing the way I talk to people I think don't matter." A pause. "I had a lot of noticing to do. I know. I want to be better." Celeste's voice was barely audible. "I don't know how to become that without someone telling me I was terrible first." Mira smiled, the first real smile she'd offered her. Most of us don't. That's what this whole thing was about. After Celeste left, Mira sealed the last bag. She stood in the empty room for one moment, looked at the walls where she'd spent 7 months becoming someone she'd always almost been. Then she picked up her belongings and walked out without looking back. The Invisible Threads collection launched 8 months later. The Royal Gallery, private exhibition hall in the capital. The guest list included fashion designers, artists, nobles who moved between kingdoms like weather. Alara stood at the door greeting arrivals in a crimson gown that had taken 3 months to create. But in the front row, 50 seats had been reserved. 50 people who had never attended a fashion exhibition in their lives. Housekeepers, laundresses, kitchen workers, stable hands, personal servants. All of them dressed for tonight in pieces from the new collection. The collection was built around a single premise. Every garment had been designed in collaboration with household workers. Women and men who had spent their careers making noble lives possible without being credited for any of it. A portion of every commission went directly into a scholarship fund for their children. Mira stood in the gallery as the exhibition opened. Through the archway, she could see the front row. Could see the faces of the servants and workers as the gowns were revealed. Her mother's work filtered through their stories. Some of them had their hands pressed to their mouths. A woman in the second seat was quietly crying. Alara appeared at her shoulder, took her hand without speaking. They stood there together and watched. After the exhibition, the gallery opened for mingling, and Mira moved through the room talking to the women from the front row, learning names and histories she should have been learning all along. Somewhere in the crowd, she spotted a face she hadn't expected to see. Celeste Ashford had traveled to the capital. She was standing near the back, holding her wine goblet with both hands, looking at the display panels along the walls. Portraits of household workers from 15 provinces. Each one captioned with their name, their years of service, their dream for their children. She'd been looking at one panel for a long time. Mira walked over. "You came." Celeste turned. Her eyes were red at the edges. "I needed to see it." She gestured at the room, at the front row, women still laughing with each other, at the collection, at the portraits. "I needed to see what you built from what I tried to break." Mira stood beside her and looked at the panel Celeste had been studying. A portrait of a woman in her 50s, a household cook for 22 years. The caption read, "She raised 3 children on kitchen wages. None of them know how hard it was." "That night," Celeste said slowly, "when you walked into that hall, I thought you came to destroy me." "I know, but you didn't." "You could have." Her voice was quiet. "You had every reason to, and you didn't." "Destroying you wasn't the point," Mira said. "The point was that the room needed to see what it looks like when you assume someone is less than you, And you're wrong. Not wrong because she turned out to be somebody famous. She paused. Wrong because she was always somebody before the gown, before the name. She was somebody because she was a person. That's all it takes. Celeste looked at her for a long time. Then she nodded, the slow, deliberate nod of someone filing something permanent. I'm volunteering now, she said. At a workers' training program. It's uncomfortable in ways I didn't anticipate. A breath. I keep realizing how small my world was. That discomfort is good, Mira said. Stay with it. They stood side by side in front of the portrait for another quiet moment. Thank you, Celeste said finally, for not being what I expected, for being someone worth learning from, even when I didn't deserve it. Mira picked up 2 goblets from a passing tray and handed one over. We're all works in progress. Every single one of us. They touched goblets. The portrait watched from the wall. A woman who had raised 3 children on kitchen wages, without anyone knowing how hard it was. Mira made a note to find out her name, her real name, and make sure it was somewhere permanent. She returned home the next morning. Her mother was asleep when she arrived. It had been a long week. Mira moved quietly through the estate, past the design workshop with its bolts of silk and linen and the singular organized chaos that she had grown up inside. She stopped in the doorway of the workshop. On the dress form near the window, her mother had pinned a sketch. New collection. The charcoal lines were fast, intuitive, the way Alara worked when something was pouring out of her that she couldn't stop. Along the bottom of the sketch, in her mother's handwriting, for the girl who went away and came back herself. Mira stood there in the doorway for a long time, not because she was sad, not because she was nostalgic, because it occurred to her clearly, and for the first time, that she had never once, in 7 months of living without her name, stopped being herself. The name could be removed. The money could be removed. The access and the ease and the open doors, all of it gone. And she had still been Mira. That was the answer she'd gone looking for. She finally had it. The measure of who you are isn't what you have. It's who you remain when everything is taken away, and how you treat the people who never had anything to begin with.